On August 16, 1997, the world lost an icon. At the age of 42 and beloved by millions of people all over, Elvis Presley passed away. Now, this would have been the end of a glorious era for most people, but for some, it didn't stop there. And as soon as news broke that the king had passed away, sources started leaking evidence of another story, one stating that Elvis had not left the building. In this episode, we're going to look into the evidence and ask the question, where is Elvis now? As far as theories go, there were tons of unanswered questions that did not sit right with the public. Mainly his strange involvement with the U.S. law enforcement, the mysterious timing and circumstance surrounding his death, and maybe the most intriguing of them all, the Elvis sightings. These questions got conspiracists saying that Elvis was hiding from the mafia and his death was in fact a cover-up, so that Elvis could safely live out the rest of his days in witness protection. But to understand that, we need to look at why Elvis would even be on the hit list from the mafia. And that leads us to the first question: was Elvis actually an undercover government agent? Well, you see, later in his career, on top of all his chart-topping hits and Hollywood success, Elvis started developing a strange interest for law enforcement, and it was said that he started collecting police badges from every city that he performed in, with some cities even giving him honorary titles such as Captain in Reserve with the Memphis PD. On December 21, 1970, Elvis even wrote a letter to President Nixon expressing interest in becoming a federal agent at large. But you see, that itself was strange, because this title simply did not exist. And while many people just brushed it off as Elvis making up a title to add an FBI badge to his collection, skeptics saw it differently. Because almost immediately, Elvis was sworn in as a special assistant to the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, which was in itself a strange move by the government, as it was already in the process of being done. From there, it was said that Elvis spent the following years working undercover with the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. His role was to pass on intel about various drug and crime rings that he gathered using his influence, connections, and stardom. Which leads us to the next part of this story: Elvis's Jetstar plane. A couple of years after being sworn in, Elvis put up one of his jets for sale under the guise that he had too many jets to upkeep and had to let this one go because it wasn't even airworthy and was burning a hole in his pocket. His father, Vernon, who was the business manager for the Presley estate, was tasked with finding a buyer from it, and it was through his search that he met with a man named Frederick Pro from a company called World Aircraft Exchange, who he ended up leasing the jet to under a very complicated agreement. The thing is, World Aircraft Exchange was not even a real company, but instead a shell company with ties to the mob, created with the sole purpose of siphoning off money from the Presley estate. And by the spring of 1977, more than $1 million was successfully stolen. So what does this have to do with Elvis being an undercover FBI agent, you might ask? Well, unknown to most, just at the same time as this whole ordeal was going down, the FBI was actually conducting an undercover investigation into this criminal organization. And weirdly enough, just around the time Elvis passed away, the FBI gathered enough information to put these people away. While many people have said that Elvis was not remotely involved in this, but merely a victim in the case, it seemed like it was too much of a coincidence. Which leads us to the next question, and trust me, it gets even weirder than it already has. How did Elvis actually die? Well, this is an interesting question because, you see, no one actually knows what killed Elvis. Officially, the only facts we know was that his girlfriend at that point in time found him unresponsive, slumped over on the floor of the bathroom, and even though he was declared dead at 3:30 p.m., it was more likely that he passed away between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. Strangely enough, the autopsy that was performed at 7 p.m. that same day was never publicly released, and people found it weird that the Memphis Medical Examiner announced in the afternoon, hours before the autopsy was done, that the official cause of death was a heart attack caused by Elvis straining too hard on the toilet, after which he fell forward on the floor where he was eventually found. Granted that at that point in his career, Elvis was definitely not in the healthiest shape, with reports that he was suffering from glaucoma, diabetes, an irregular heartbeat, high blood pressure, liver damage, and constipation, among other things. But interestingly enough, even though the pathologist that performed the autopsy suggested that he could have died from polypharmacy, none of them could come to the exact same conclusion on the heart attack, which further added fuel to the fire that this could be part of the cover-up or something more sinister. Bringing us to perhaps the most intriguing part of this component to the Elvis conspiracy, the funeral. A couple of days later, on the 18th of August, claims started to arise stating that a wax dummy was used in place for the open casket viewing. As from the photo on the cover of the September 6th issue of the National Enquirer, many fans thought that the face looked nothing like Elvis, rather a younger, badly made version of him. And while these speculations led to some fans saying that perhaps a photoshopped version of Elvis was used in the photo, nothing could be verified, as the original film that was used to take the photo during the funeral just so happened to be destroyed in a fire. Then there was the issue of the 10 pallbearers struggling to transport the coffin, which for some strange reason looked like it weighed way more than a normal casket. Some say this was due to a cooling system that had to be built into the casket to prevent the wax dummy from melting. But a longtime road manager of Elvis has come out to say that the weight of the casket was made of solid copper, and that was why it weighed so much. I don't know about you, but do the answers all seem a bit too convenient and fishy? Furthermore, skeptics started talking about the fact that Elvis's gravestone spelt his middle name Aaron with 2 A's instead of 1, different from what was originally listed on his birth certificate, apparently suggesting that Elvis was trying to leave subtle hints that he was not dead yet. But was he really alive? This conveniently leads us to perhaps the most compelling part of this mystery. If Elvis is dead, what is up with the Elvis sightings? The earliest recorded sighting was on the day of his death, where a witness allegedly saw a man resembling Elvis buying a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires using the name John Burroughs. Now all that seems pretty normal, except that John Burroughs was the name Elvis would use when booking hotels to avoid attention. Then there is the sighting that occurred on New Year's Day, where while on a tour of the Graceland Mansion, Mike Joseph took a photo of the pool house, and only after developing the photo revealed what looked like Elvis sitting in the pool house. Was Elvis hiding in plain sight? With more footage released in 2016 of Graceland housekeeper donning an Elvis shirt, people are convinced that Elvis was really not far from home. Subsequently, in 1979, a masked singer going by the name of Orion released an album called Reborn, in which featured music that sounded incredibly like Elvis, and not to mention the fact that he even looked like Elvis. But this theory was later debunked, saying that Orion was actually just played by a professional Elvis impersonator, Jimmy Ellis, and based on a book called Orion, which was inspired by the conspiracy of Elvis's life and death. The rumor died down until in 1981, another singer by the name of Sylvain Nora, or Elvis Aaron spelled backwards, emerged onto the scene. With a book, an album, and even a videotape of the back of Sylvain, which was supposed to be proof that Elvis was still alive, but eventually it was found out that Sylvain was actually just another Elvis impersonator called David Darlock. Now, you might think that these sightings of the King, all ending with an Elvis impersonator, was the end of false Elvis impersonations. But in 1984, a string of sightings occurred in the Kalamazoo region of Michigan, beginning with a report of Elvis at a Burger King and ending in strange places such as the 1990 film Home Alone. Even though it was thought to be used to boost sales for the tabloids, it was not till a photo was published showing Muhammad Ali with Jesse Jackson, and if you take a look at the background, Elvis Presley, which got the world talking again, because if this really was Elvis, it wouldn't have been a big stretch, as he and Muhammad Ali were known to be good friends when he was alive. But photos tend not to be very credible and can be altered. Which leads us to the next and perhaps most interesting piece of evidence was 1988 saw the release of the book Is Elvis Alive?, written by Gail Brewer Giorgio, who claimed to have gone through extensive research, following paper trails and FBI reports that proved that Elvis was in fact still alive, and had to go into the witness protection program after outing a giant criminal ring under the Project Fountain Pen. Funnily enough, in the same theory, Elvis's weight gain was also attributed to this cover-up, as it was mentioned that while planning for his exit, the people in charge of faking Elvis's death found a convincing body double that was suffering from a terminal disease, with the only issue being that the body double was twice the size of Elvis. Thus, the weight gain was all part of the plan. Along the paper trail, the most compelling piece of evidence was that there was still a long-standing life insurance policy that had not been taken out despite Elvis's passing, as well as credit card history with very recent spending, and interestingly enough, a John Burroughs who moved to 2901 Columbus in Fort Worth, Tennessee. And at this point in the video, you probably know who the name John Burroughs was really pointing at. Well, there are always two sides to the story, and at the end of the day, if Elvis was really hiding in the witness protection program, would he really be out posing for photos, saying that we can see that most of the Elvis sightings are debunkable with impersonators or people trying to catch a break by using the Elvis name to boost their career sales, but there are still some which have been left unexplained? Why would the life insurance policy taken out on Elvis Presley still be active? Or why was there a John Burroughs who was spending on Elvis's credit and living in Columbus? But despite the uncertainty, one thing for sure that we can confirm is that Elvis, just like any other human, has a set date and expiry, and even if he was still alive, he is not going to live forever. As much as we'd like to think that he's a prophesied celebrity who will return in the next couple of years and show people how he faked his death, there is only going to be a few more years before that plausibility becomes a complete fantasy. But even though that is the case, with all the evidence laid out, it is not completely impossible that Elvis has in fact not left the building.